Welcome to Ink Thinks. Alright, time for the big one. I had thought that Waluigi was a subject of a lot of heated debate in the Smash community, but honestly, I'm not sure if he can measure up to the vast amount of arguments that surround Sora from Kingdom Hearts. Today I'm going through and breaking down every single argument that I could find, both for Sora and against Sora, to determine his final chances of getting in. Let's get into it. The year was 1996, and Super Mario 64 had taken the world by storm. Designer Tetsuya Nomura was the principal character designer for Final Fantasy VII, and was so impressed with Mario 64 that he really wanted to make something of his own on a similar scale. When he mentioned this to his colleagues, they basically laughed it off and said that the only way he could ever make the same kind of impact as Nintendo would be to have a similar format but with characters as well known as Disney's. Well, I guess Nomura took that to heart, and after hearing the back end of a conversation between the creators of Final Fantasy, lamenting how Mickey Mouse would have been the perfect character for an upcoming project, but Disney wouldn't let them use him, Nomura saw a perfect opportunity to execute his vision of using Nintendo characters in an action RPG. With such an original idea, the producers agreed to give Nomura his very first shot at directing a title. Now, ordinarily, trying to find a good way to bring up a Disney action RPG crossover seems like a daunting task, but Disney and Square Enix shared a building at the time, and a chance encounter between Shinji Hashimoto and a Disney executive paved the way for Hashimoto to pitch the idea. Now, originally, Disney had the impression that Square Enix was offering to make whatever kind of game Disney told them to without needing much creative input from Square themselves, and so they wanted to make Donald Duck the star of a game. But Nomura stuck to his guns and pitched his own idea for a game that he wanted to call Kingdom. Kingdom would incorporate Disney characters such as Donald or Goofy, but would also involve Final Fantasy characters as a show of good faith, since Bob Iger of Disney was being so generous by allowing them to use Disney characters and worlds. At the center of the story would be a spiky-haired protagonist by the name of Sora, who was actually originally supposed to have tiger ears and a tail, but eventually, with Disney's help, the concept was refined to the Sora that we know and love today. His big yellow shoes, white gloves, and big red jumpsuit in his original game were all made as a reference to Mickey Mouse in his aesthetic. The name Kingdom came because Nomura wanted something that was reminiscent of Disney. He thought of Disney World, and in particular, he thought of the Animal Kingdom. That said, he had trouble getting the rights to an IP titled something as generic as Kingdom, so Heart was added to the end of the title since it was a core part of the game. Now, one of the things that Kingdom Hearts is most infamous for is its complicated story. At first, Square was focused on making the gameplay and story of Kingdom Hearts something that could appeal in a satisfying way to Disney's younger audience. But then Nomura was told that if Kingdom Hearts didn't strive for the same level of storytelling as Final Fantasy, that the game would be a failure. Whether or not that advice was well executed on, no one can say that Nomura didn't get an idea in his head and give it his all. What resulted was a game that seemed to perfectly balance the action RPG mechanics with traditional RPG mechanics, in a formative way that laid the groundwork for many RPGs to follow in its wake. Now, that's a brief history of the game, but its relevance extends beyond just the interesting backstory. It has nearly always been a popular game with very solid sales, and this is a point that people often like to bring up in favor of Sora. Even before Kingdom Hearts 3 in 2019, the series had sold 24 million units, and Kingdom Hearts 3 proved to be the game's best-selling entry in the series, shipping out over 5 million copies in its first week, and 5 of those days were Japan exclusives. We can estimate that the current series sales today are somewhere around 30 million, which is huge. To put this in perspective, Banjo-Kazooie sold around 3.5 million copies if we round down. Joker's game, Persona 5, sold about 4 million copies, and his entire franchise sold about 10 million copies. If DLC was a competition based on sales, Kingdom Hearts would come in third place, only behind Minecraft and Dragon Quest. But apart from sheer sales numbers, there's no denying that Kingdom Hearts is popular in the greater gaming culture in general outside of just the dedicated Smash scene. While Sora does show up at the top of nearly every poll out there, including an unofficial one to gauge the votes of the Smash ballot, which was used to choose Banjo and Bayonetta, we can also see the series' popularity evidenced by the huge jump in Google's search analytics with the new release, major hype circulating around general conversation, or even the spectacular Binging with Babish episode dedicated to the game. The series has been popular for years, and regardless of whether or not it's ever left mainstream, Kingdom Hearts 3 definitely brought the series back to its former glory. Well, at least in terms of hype, maybe not execution. Now, I do want to acknowledge that before Kingdom Hearts 3, the game hadn't had a main series game since 2005 in the form of Kingdom Hearts 2. But a lot of that is due to the way that Kingdom Hearts works as a series. Each game is important to the series as a whole, regardless of whether or not they seem like spin-offs. And so with all of these combined, I really don't think that anyone can in good faith say that Sora is an irrelevant character who isn't deserving by nature of his popularity. But let's talk about Sora himself for a minute, because another common criticism lobbied against Sora is the fact that people feel like he's a boring, one-dimensional anime swordsman with no discernible personality. There's a lot to unpack here, including a few valid criticisms. But let's start with the claim of no discernible personality. Now, I could sit back here and talk about how while Sora really doesn't have too much of a personality, he seems to be kind of a blank slate for the rest of the Disney world to reflect upon him, and he's thematically kind of that child that doesn't want to grow up, that's in line with Disney's philosophy. I could do that, but the personality argument is one that doesn't need to be debunked by showing evidence of an interesting character. Instead, I'd point to the fact that personality 100% doesn't matter when including Smash characters. First off, a vast majority of Nintendo's original characters act as a canvas for the players to project themselves onto, despite not having much personality of their own, like Link. But we can also see that personality has never really mattered too much to Smash. Just little things like Mr. Game & Watch or Captain Falcon coming to Smash, despite having basically no personality in their games, shows that even in the base roster, this wasn't really taken into account. But we can also see this evidenced within the DLC with the inclusion of Steve. Steve has got to be the character with the least personality in Smash, and he was still included in the game. In fact, he wasn't only included, but he's shaping up to be one of the most accurately represented characters in the whole series. And all of this is done in spite of his lack of personality. So even if Sora might not be the most engaging protagonist, people feel a genuine, incredible attachment to the characters in Kingdom Hearts. They grew up with these characters and the games, and just like any game of your childhood, but especially one with the music, characters, and themes of Kingdom Hearts, it's bound to leave a lasting impact on you. These games are like injecting straight nostalgia into your veins. If you grew up with Disney or Final Fantasy characters, you get to see the characters that you know and love interacting in new ways, and for Disney characters, you get to play as them or explore some of the worlds from their movies. But at this point, it's gone far beyond just Disney and Final Fantasy, because now people have grown nostalgic for Kingdom Hearts itself, so that adds a whole new element to the nostalgia train that just continues to fuel upon itself game after game. And speaking of those games, they're legitimately fun. Now, I'll admit that I've had limited exposure to the series personally. The first and only time that I played it was when I was very young at an office in Disneyland when someone was trying to sell my parents on a timeshare. But even just those 2 hours of gameplay as a child were so fun that I continue to remember it even to this day. A lot of people say that Kingdom Hearts 2 was the best game in the series, and it was also the only main series game for a long time, so a lot of people grew up with the game, giving them a positive image for the series as a whole. And even the games that hit less hard are pretty experimental, and people tend to enjoy the variety among them, not to mention the novelty of seeing Disney characters interact can really help carry the games, and also not mentioning that the games themselves can make an enjoyable experience in the sort of irony of how bad they are sometimes, especially with Kingdom Hearts 1. I mentioned the story a little bit earlier, and as someone looking in at the series from the outside, this is what I can tell you. It seems like the game's story is a huge jumbled mess of broken nonsense, but because of that, people seem to really love connecting the dots and trying to figure out what the developers were possibly planning with the story all along. It's almost like a cartoony version of the Dark Souls community. But while the story may be convoluted, there is no denying that the game has incredible music, uplifting, positive themes that make its audience happy, a compelling balance of difficulty with a surprising amount of depth to the combat, and the game itself serving as a formative, life-shaping experience for a lot of people who grew up on it and who needed hope to get through some tough decisions. And with all of this put together, it's really not hard to tell why the game is so popular. But anyway, I think I've sufficiently made my case for Sora's popularity by highlighting his sales and cultural impact. So let's start breaking down some of the more specific arguments in favor and against him. For starters, I've seen some people claiming that Steve's inclusion bolsters Sora's chances because just like Steve, a lot of people see Sora as a never gonna happen character. With Steve being added into Smash, this is renewed hope for a lot of people that barriers are being broken down to the point that Sora might be able to join the game. And I don't know about that. While Steve certainly does highlight the fact that Nintendo has a large enough influence to be able to work with nearly anyone, I don't think that the inclusion of one outlandish character is directly tied to the inclusion of another in the future. I also see people say that because Steve is so popular, Nintendo might need some really heavy hitters to coast off of Steve's hype. And while Sora would probably fit that mold, and in theory this could be true, Nintendo hasn't exactly inspired confidence in me regarding their ability to balance hype throughout a pass, as we see with Byleth being the one to finish off the last fighter pass. But far and away, the biggest argument that I've seen thrown against Sora can be boiled down to one word: Disney. It's nearly impossible to find a single conversation about Sora without someone bringing up the fact that big, bad, mean corporate Disney will never allow their characters in a Nintendo game because they're big and bad and mean and corporate. But how much does this hold up? First off, I do want to acknowledge that Disney 100% does own the rights to Sora and not Square Enix, as some people may think. They've made this public knowledge through several of their statements and interviews. I recommend checking out the YouTuber HMK for some more info on Sora's usage rights. But right off the bat, this does mean a few interesting things. While Sora stars in a Square Enix game, and while Disney has stated that they don't make any decisions regarding Sora without consulting Square Enix out of good faith, I think that this technically makes Sora a Disney rep, not a Square rep. I know that there's been an ongoing flame war between fans of Geno and fans of Sora, not to mention the other billion Square reps out there that would be awesome to have in Smash, but are they even competing for the same spot? Sure, we've seen Cloud and Hero both come from Square, adding their total representation in Smash up to 2 characters, but we've also seen no indication from Nintendo that they set a quota on how many characters can be included from a single company. We can only speculate based off of past patterns, but even those are constantly being challenged and shattered with inclusions of characters like Steve, or like Min Min with the fan rule of no spirits being fighters. So like I said, while I don't think that there's any explicit limits put on company representation, even if there were, Sora appears to come from Disney rather than Square itself. But that brings up an interesting point in and of itself. Sakurai made a famous quote years ago that I want to read verbatim because it's going to be important. He said, "I get all these kinds of requests from abroad, like, where's my beloved Iron Man, or where's my beloved Goku? However, basically Smash will only have content from video games in it." End quote. Now, at first glance, this seems to work against Sora. After all, why would Disney, the creators of princess movies and Phineas and Ferb, ever think that they could possibly get a character into Smash if Sakurai stated that only video game content can get into the game? Well, it's a bit more complicated than that. In my Steve video, I mentioned how Rare and Mojang aren't necessarily from the same company, despite falling under one larger Microsoft umbrella due to how diverse Microsoft is and the way that they handle smaller subsidiaries. Well, if Microsoft had their hand in a bucket of different companies, Disney has their hand in the whole ocean. Seriously, I shouldn't need to explain how many different aspects of culture and media Disney has their foot into. But everything from movies to superheroes to theme parks to streaming, they own so much of popular entertainment that it's crazy. Naturally, they've also tried out the video game market. Their gaming company has taken on many names over the years, from Disney Interactive to Buena Vista Games. But among all of these restructurings and renamings, one thing remains clear. Disney's gaming division is a legitimate gaming company that's entirely separate from its other entertainment mediums, despite having frequent collaborations and showing the same characters. What I mean by that is that Sakurai wouldn't be going in and talking with the creators of Frozen to negotiate for Sora and Smash, but rather he'd be going in to speak with the people who have been fostering relationships with other gaming companies for years. And we've seen this game division of Disney work with Nintendo many times over the years, even as early as helping them get their feet on the ground in the days of Nintendo making playing cards. And we can also see it in an exclusive line of Epic Mickey games, or from Kingdom Hearts coming to Nintendo handheld consoles, and Melody of Memories coming to the Switch. And we can even see Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck being straight up mentioned by name in Brawl's Chronicle mode. The companies have a long and healthy history. And we've also seen a willingness from both Disney and Nintendo to lend their properties to other companies to help each other out. For example, we can see Sonic make an appearance in Wreck-It Ralph, but we also see Wreck-It Ralph make an appearance in Sonic All-Star Racing. We can also see Disney's properties making an appearance in games like Fortnite. In fact, even some of Disney's biggest moneymakers are being handed over to collabs, like Star Wars and Marvel, both in Fortnite. But this kind of generosity goes two ways, as we can see from Bowser being included in Wreck-It Ralph. So naturally, one might wonder why. If big bad corporation Disney is so greedy, why would they be willing to lend their biggest IPs to other companies, and why would they ever consider Sora for Smash? Well, the answer can be found on an industry news article on the reputable site Gamasutra titled, "Disney says its future game efforts lie in licensing, not publishing." Now, the takeaway from this article is pretty self-explanatory itself, but essentially Disney is saying that while they have never found much success on making their own games, they've found huge success in licensing their characters and rights to make games to other people. Basically, as long as Disney Gaming likes someone and believes that there's profit to be made, they're going to be willing to lend out their characters to some other companies. And we already know that Disney not only likes Nintendo, but that they also like Smash Bros. Specifically, and the idea of Sora being added to Smash. For more info on that, you can check out the video Who Owns Sora put out by HMK. A partnership between Disney and Smash could really help open the door to allow Disney to get a better foothold in the gaming industry. But even if Sora himself is a character that Disney would likely have no problem lending to Nintendo, that still brings up the issue of whether or not Nintendo would allow Sora to be in Smash because he's so heavily tied to characters like Donald Duck or Goofy, who would obviously break Sakurai's only video game content rule. Well, let's take a look at this. First off, we don't know what capacity Sakurai meant when he said that quote. Did he mean that nothing outside of gaming could be featured as a fighter or assist trophy? Or did he mean literally no mention of any character outside of gaming can come into Smash? I don't believe that it's the latter one, given that Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck are mentioned in Brawl's Chronicle mode, but that also brings up the point of what counts as a non-gaming character. He specifically mentioned Goku and Iron Man when he gave that quote, and both of those characters definitely originated from mediums outside of gaming, despite being featured in many games. But while both of those characters have been in video games, it's obvious that their main appeal is comics and animation, while Mickey Mouse and the gang, on the other hand, is a little less clear. While Mickey certainly did make his debut in animation, he's also appeared in a total of 66 video games, which is far more than Tony Stark and Goku combined. Mickey has a strong force in animated media, but he also definitely holds his own in gaming, and especially with him being playable in many games on Nintendo consoles, it makes me wonder if Mickey and the gang would really count as entirely fourth-party characters. We have seen in some extent that the origin of a character doesn't totally matter. On a technicality, we could say that Greninja was added to Smash despite making his first appearance in the Pokemon anime, which I know isn't a great argument, but I do think that it isn't as cut and dry as people say. At the very least, it's not a stretch to think that the Mickey Mouse charm at the end of Sora's Keyblade wouldn't be a deal breaker. And while it's a bit shakier of an argument to stand on, the fact that this version of Donald and Goofy are primarily featured in Kingdom Hearts, they could potentially stand on their own as video game versions of those characters, rather than solely fourth-party characters. At the very least, even if Mickey, Donald, and Goofy were undoubtedly non-gaming characters, there's no denying that Sora is undoubtedly a gaming character and wouldn't be affected by this rule. But for the sake of argument, let's say that Mickey, Donald, and Goofy were deal breakers. Could Sora still be represented? I think so. We've seen Sakurai be willing to change up minor details on a character's costume before to make them more appropriate for Smash. Removing the charm from Sora's Keyblade would be super simple. But that brings up another question. What about character authenticity? People argue that you can't have Sora without Donald and Goofy, and that they're an integral part of his game and character. And yeah, while it's true that in the games Donald and Goofy are closely tied to Sora, we also see Cloud in Smash without Tifa or Barrett, who are also arguably just as important to Cloud as Goofy and Donald are to Sora. But even with that point, we can see plenty of examples in Kingdom Hearts where Sora makes an appearance without even mentioning Donald or Goofy, such as the movie based on the mobile game, or most of the Japan-exclusive Kingdom Hearts games like Kingdom Hearts X. I think that anyone who genuinely thinks that Donald or Goofy would be an obstacle for Sakurai are severely underestimating how well he can make a character feel authentic while still working around some of the more difficult aspects of the character that might not be suitable for Smash. This same exact argument of not being able to do a character justice has been thrown up against a ton of different characters, with the most recent one being Steve, and it has never really held up. But when speaking of a character being done justice, we should ask if Disney would have an issue with a character being put in a violent video game. Alright, I don't know where this perception of Disney not having violence in their media comes from, but it just flat out isn't true. Obviously, if this was Mortal Kombat or something, we'd be having a different conversation, but this is Super Smash Bros. The violence feels a lot more like slapstick than an actual genuine example of violence. I mean, we see just as much violence in the end of Beauty and the Beast as we do in this game. But even outside of slapstick, where's the perception that Disney is opposed to violence coming from? I mean, we've seen them allow Sora in Kingdom Hearts, which is arguably arguably just as violent as Smash Bros. And allows you to beat up animals and literal children within the first few minutes of the game, but also try telling me that Disney is opposed to all forms of violence with a straight face while watching What Happened to Mufasa, or really any other animated Disney parents. And outside of their animated movies, we've also seen them explore violence and more adult themes with their other franchises like Pirates of the Caribbean or many of their Touchstone live-action productions. But as far as the claim that they wouldn't want their characters fighting alongside Solid Snake or Bayonetta, where is that coming from? Like, it would be one thing if this was straight up Mickey Mouse being blasted in the face with a bazooka, which I still don't exactly think would be an issue, but this is Sora, combined with the fact that it's not an overtly recognizable Disney character, and that the violence is more akin to slapstick than anything, and the fact that Disney's never really shied away from violence in their direct line of media, I really don't think that this is a valid argument. But while some people speculate about the ramifications of violence, other people object to Disney themselves as a company, seeing it as an exploitive, soulless corporation who doesn't deserve any limelight. Well, this is definitely a subjective thing, and you're entitled to your own opinion. The truth is that you could focus on any company throughout history and find examples of harsh labor conditions, consumerism, or with Disney, things like buying out a bunch of companies. But you could also focus just as much on charity work, or the Make-A-Wish Foundation grants, and the fact that many of their movies has lit up and shaped childhoods for many generations. You could argue either way, but regardless of what you think about Disney, it could be a point brought up for you against personally wanting Sora, but it definitely doesn't factor into the likelihood of Sora's inclusion. A few more quick notes that I want to touch on real fast are the anime swordsman argument, the nature of Kingdom Hearts as a crossover, and Marvel vs. Capcom. This should be quick. A lot of people say that Sora would be another boring anime swordsman. This is one of the stupidest arguments in Smash Bros. Speculation. Apart from the anime criticism being weirdly applied to a Japanese company with animated characters feeling very weak, Sora himself has a ton of potential to play very unique and unlike other characters with his magic and summons, not to mention that he literally doesn't use a sword. Get a better argument. People also go after the fact that because Kingdom Hearts is a crossover game, it would be weird to have a crossover within a crossover. To this I say that I don't think it would be that weird. We're not getting the entire crossover game in Smash, but we're getting a single character plucked from that game and put into Smash. This is a really strange argument. Concerning Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite, a lot of people claim that because Disney had such an iron grip over the production of Marvel vs. Capcom that they ruined it. There's a lot of gray area to this, and Capcom also definitely shares a lot of the blame here, but there's also no denying that Disney had a much greater influence over Marvel vs. Capcom than they would have over Smash, due to the fact that they own 50% of the roster rather than 1/80th of the roster. I really wouldn't worry about this at all. So is there anything that I legitimately think could be working against Sora? Yes, there is. In 2018, amidst rampant Smash speculation for Fighter Pass 1, Shinji Hashimoto, co-creator of Kingdom Hearts and Square Enix executive, responded to a tweet from a fan that roughly translated into, "Sora for Smash, please Mr. Hashimoto." To which Hashimoto responded, yes. After a few minutes though, the reply from Hashimoto was deleted and he went silent as speculation grew. Obviously, if Sora had been planned for Smash and he said this, that would be him breaking a non-disclosure agreement, which is a document that would essentially prevent him from mentioning anything. And so it sounds like Sora probably wasn't in Smash and that's why he was able to say this, and that was my original take on it. I thought that Hashimoto probably sent this tweet out thoughtlessly, but because Sora wasn't planned for Smash, he was worried about damaging fan expectations. After seeing how fans reacted and thought it might be confirmation, he deleted it. That said, after doing a lot of research into how NDAs work, they're a lot more fluid than you may think. Although they're typically a legally binding document, it's far more often that they're enforced socially or through fines rather than litigation. People accidentally break NDA all the time. And the punishments can range anywhere from saying, "Don't do that again," to actually pursuing criminal charges, although that one is rare. It doesn't seem out of the question that Hashimoto could have deleted the tweet to manage fan expectations and to not disappoint anyone, but it also seems possible to me that he replied thoughtlessly without thinking of the context and accidentally broke NDA, which is why he deleted it. A breach of NDA like this wouldn't negate Sora's inclusion if that's what this was, but it may make Nintendo a bit less likely to work with Hashimoto in the future. Ultimately though, we don't know why he made it and why he deleted it shortly after. We do know that Steve was in the work for 5 years, but we also know that Persona 5 had only been out for a couple years before Joker was added in, so it seems like 5 years probably isn't the norm here. If there were negotiations, we don't know if they happened before, during, or after Fighter Pass 1, if they happened at all. In summary, there's just too much to be able to say here with this tweet, whether or not it works in favor or against Sora. And to be honest, we might never know. I think this is simultaneously the best and worst argument against Sora's inclusion, and I think that you can argue either side convincingly. In the end, there is no denying that a lot is working in favor of Sora in terms of popularity and cultural influence. There's probably a lot of Kingdom Hearts enthusiasts who would buy a Switch and Smash just because Sora's in it, and it's safe to assume that Nintendo is almost certainly aware of his popularity and his demand in Smash. It's hard to say whether Sora's Disney origins and imagery would be an issue, but I imagine they wouldn't be. But I also think that if approached right, someone could argue either side with a pretty convincing argument. The same goes for the tweet that I just mentioned. I think that someone in good faith could argue either side of that. Because of all of this, I've had a really hard time formulating my own personal opinions on whether or not Sora would be in the game. If I had a Keyblade pressed to my head and I was forced to answer, I think I'd say, yeah, he's kind of likely. There's a lot more in his favor than there is against him, in my opinion. And many of the things that people say against him don't hold any weight, especially when they're just throwing around single-word arguments. Is he the most likely character? No, I don't think so. But the fact that Sora exists in this weird gray area of convincingly being able to be argued either way makes him one of the most fun characters to speculate about, in my opinion. As long as people are intelligent with their arguments and once again don't just throw out lazy one-word arguments like Disney. I would give Sora's chances of getting in a 7.5 out of 10, which if you watch my videos, you would know that's pretty high for me. But what do you think? Rate his chances in the comments below from 1 to 10 and give a short reasoning behind it. Keep things civil, and I think that this could be a really interesting comment section. If you want to see more content like this, hit subscribe, or hit the bell to actually be notified when I post. Comment below to say who I should cover next. Click the playlist on the right to binge my entire final analysis series, or click the video on the left to see something that YouTube handpicked just for you. Come join my Discord using the link in the description for further discussion. Thanks to Obese Rob, Tiny Mo, and Real Lemon for your help on this video. Stay smashing.